My MFA thesis was inspired by the Romanovs and this idea of this family who was dealing with hemophilia at a time where you have no treatment.
So often, people's inspirational stories are framed as, "Isn't it incredible that they achieved this dream despite these setbacks?" And for people with bleeding disorders, it's often pinnacles that were reached despite their disease. But that's why I was so happy to talk to Christian Harris today. He's a fashion designer, and he looked at his disease and looked at the history of it and found artistic inspiration from it. But even with all of this, he still faced setbacks and challenges, just like all artists striving to create. So today, I wanted to hear about how he came to this idea and how he embraced his personal history during his journey. My name is Chris Bombardier, and I'm a mountaineer with hemophilia. From 2011 to 2018, I successfully climbed 7 summits, the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents. But I'm not the only one with a story to tell. This season, we're talking with inspirational people all over the world who've navigated their own bleeding disorders and embraced who they really are. Now they're on their own journeys to achieve what many have called impossible. This is the Final Summit Season 3, Climbing Your Own Mountain. On today's episode, Inspiration from Circumstance.
This next segment is brought to you by Genentech. Community is everything, and that's especially true for people living with bleeding disorders like hemophilia A. That's why Genentech's team is here to connect you to the larger hemophilia A community. Genentech offers one-on-one support where you can hear real stories from people living with hemophilia, learn about events, and even check out an educational rap anthem for a hemophilia A treatment. Genentech knows that hemophilia A affects everyone differently, and that's why it's so important to connect with others who understand what it's like. To meet members of the hemophilia A community and to learn more about Genentech, head over to www.hemophiliacommunity.com.
How old are you, Christian?
I am 36.
Oh, 36. Okay, I'm 38. Almost the same age. I always think you're like early 30s or late 20s.
I think I am too. Reality does not bear that out.
When I go to bed at 8:30, you can tell that I'm not that age.
I am Christian Harris, Christian L. Harris, everywhere online. So Instagram, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. I have severe-ish hemophilia B, base level about 2%. I currently live just outside of Portland, Oregon, on the West Coast, but I was born and raised in Maryland.
I'm really excited to have you on the podcast, and I'd love to start out with how you found out you had hemophilia or how you were diagnosed.
It began shortly after my birth with an operation that led to a surprise. Oh, you have a hemophiliac. So yeah, there was no known history in my family before that. So it's like, okay, here we go. Life is going to be a little different, especially for my parents.
Yeah. Did you ever ask them what it was like to find out their son had hemophilia right when he was born and like how it impacted their outlook on what it would look like having a son with hemophilia?
I think for my dad, the biggest thing was when he found out he was having a son, decided that his son would be heavyweight champion of the world. And while I have made incredible feats toward being a heavyweight champion, not so much.
That's funny. And I think that's pretty common, though, in our community of like fathers having these athletic ambitions for their kids. They're going to play sports like they did or play football like they did. And so has he ever mentioned anything about that since then, or just is it kind of like a joke in your family about heavyweight champion?
It didn't even really rise to the level of being a joke in the family. It was just one of those things that my dad had mentioned to me a few times. And beyond that, I did have a lot of athletic cousins and things, so it was always weird to not be able to do those things. Because growing up in Maryland in the 90s with hemophilia, the guidance from our treatment center was no contact sports, put the kid in the pool. So it's hard to find a hemophiliac from Maryland who's not a great swimmer. As a result of that, I'm a good swimmer. I enjoy swimming. But contact sports was out. But we were always at the basketball court or at the football field because all of my cousins played. none of which are affected by hemophilia. So I think for me, sports became a part of that struggle of just accepting my own kind of weirdness. And I don't mean weird in a bad way at all. It was just, I liked the things that I liked, and there was really no one there to sort of guide me through that a whole lot, a little bit with the creative stuff, because I did have some creative relatives, but sports was just a part of that. Another thing on the list of things that I didn't really have access to, but I also wasn't as interested in, if I'm honest, as other things.
No, it totally makes sense. It's funny, when I was young, I did play sports and I was very into that, but I always had the sense of feeling different than people and wanting to be the same in some aspects. And now as I've gotten older, I've realized that the sameness is not that interesting. And being unique and like having a bleeding disorder or being interested in different things is actually interesting and cool. And when you get to your 20s, I think it's like you find your groups, you find your people that have those same interests, and that like is where things like blossom I've experienced. And I don't know if that's kind of similar for you.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Having those experiences and moving away from home and going to college and pursuing what I had in my mind, right? And I think so much of finding your tribe and getting to that space where you learn to enjoy your own interests, which sounds weird. Sometimes it takes a few steps for us to get there, to have the discovery and to, oh, I enjoy this and continue to pursue it. It starts with you having that notion in your head, right? That's sort of the first trigger. I'm gonna go to school for fashion design. And what I found was everything that I enjoyed in high school really came to play in garment engineering and garment making, geometry, history, and art. So in apparel, that element of history and being inclusive of the whole world, you get to study all of it through what people have been wearing for millennia. So by the end of high school, it came down to fashion and photography, and I was looking on the College Board website, and I gave you some figures on salaries, and it said fashion designers make more than photographers. So that's what I went with. It was my original inclination anyway, but that's what I went with.
You seem like you've always been a person that's gravitated towards like artistic expression. What do you love about creativity and being artistic?
There are so many things. I think the most romantic element of being able to create things is very often in the apparel industry, right? We are making things or designing something, and then somebody else will make it. It'll be made in a factory or things like that. I've made things that have gone onto the market, sure, but most of the things that I've made are things that I designed, patterned, cut, stitched, did all the work myself, right? So I look at many of the things that I create being more like a painting, like how we think of creation in that way, like you're painting it and it's something you made. And the fact that there will be things that I made that are here long after I am not. I think of something I made ended up in a Goodwill in, I don't know, Iowa City, Iowa for some random reason, right? And somebody finding it and loving it. And I think that to me is just like the idea that I can create things that will have their own life and that will go into others' lives is just something that's magical in a way. And in that way, creativity can also be very addictive because you learn to expect different outcomes for your time. So before I started sewing, I would sit in the garage with my godbrothers playing Halo for hours, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Had a blast. But once I started creating things, I now expect to spend time doing something and to have something at the end of that time more than entertainment and accomplishment, because making things is also entertaining to me and I feel accomplished, but there's something now that exists that didn't exist before.
Like a tangible final product that exists, which is cool.
Yeah, and it's something that you learn from. Everything I make, one of my favorite things, because I wear a lot of things that I make, when people ask about it, I always love telling them what's wrong with it or where I screwed up or where I could have done better or what I'm going to do better about the next thing. That's just how my brain works, that kind of Kaizen, continuous improvement. So everything that I make is its own sort of lesson and story by itself. And then very often I will build off of it. So there will be the next permutation of that thing. And that I enjoyed doing that as well.
Embracing my creative side has always been very foreign to me. If you put a paintbrush in front of me, I just don't know what to do with it. I tried playing the trumpet in middle school and was terrible. Loud and terrible, which is not a good combination. I can draw a mean stick figure, but that's about it. And don't ask me to dance. It's not pretty. So I always thought I just wasn't a creative person. But a good friend of mine, Justin, who I should add is extremely creative, changed that. He said that creativity and art can be found anywhere. We are all creative beings. It just depends on what avenue that creativity chooses to show up. Justin taught me how to be more appreciative of creativity and aware of where it presents itself. Many people are creative with their words and telling stories. Some are creative in using their body to create art, and others can be creative with their ideas for the future. That's where I think my creativity thrives. Developing thoughtful and new ways to move Save One Life forward, or even creating plans to climb the 7 summits. I don't think anyone with hemophilia had thought that was possible before. But a little bit of creativity, and maybe a little bit of crazy, made it happen. Do you think that hemophilia and growing up with a bleeding disorder guided you into what you currently are doing?
I did play a little soccer and things here and there, but because sports are pretty much off the list, my parents never really had a problem buying me art kits. And I think the biggest thing that hemophilia did for my career journey was toward the end of finishing that master's degree, you have to do your thesis. And it just kept coming back to, it needs to be a personal story then. It needs to be something that you can pull a lot from. And then that's what hemophilia, really, that's how that sort of came out. I'd spent a year plus just doing a lot of research on the Romanovs, but not just that, also Russian history and the history of Russian costume. So all of those 3 things together. And what my MFA thesis collection ended up being was all inspired by the Romanovs and this idea of this family who was dealing with hemophilia at a time where you have no treatment. Lucky for them, they were rich and they had a lot of access, right? They could get to the best doctors and the best healers of the time. At the same time, some of those medical doctors would recommend things like, oh, well, you have GI bleeding? Great, we're going to give you some laxatives, as was done to Leopold, Duke of Albany, not too long before that. They had all that access, but they were dealing with hemophilia, and it's really a family story. A lot of the reasons that pushed the Romanovs even further away from the people of Russia, which created some interesting dynamics between the leaders and the people, was because they were like trying to guard this family secret because they didn't want people to know that the heir to the throne had hemophilia. The collection then became about me reclaiming their things and their individual stories. So each garment was designed as if it belonged to a member of the family, and they were all distressed because after they were executed, a lot of their belongings were stolen, thrown in latrines and things like that. So then and there are just so many other little stories that go into it. We could spend an hour just talking about every garment. But that body of work then helped me launch my career because it picked up a bit of press. It also made the final runway show. So at SCAD at the time, there would be about 200 to 300 candidates for the final runway show, and only about 30 would make it. So my collection got to do the runway, which was great. Wow. And that sort of helped me launch a career, gave me something to stand on. And there's also an academic component. The paper to go along with it that I had to write for my thesis was about the evolution of what is considered Russian in Western European and American fashion. So wow. All of that together, which started with hemophilia, helped me build up to a career that has really allowed me to do so many things that I enjoy.
What kind of challenges did you overcome throughout that process?
I have had some very difficult moments. Throughout grad school, I was uninsured because I don't come from a family of means and wealth or anything like that. Especially like then around that time, my dad was in poor health. So I wasn't really in a position to have insurance unless I quit school and went to work full time somewhere. Luckily, I was on a study that my doctor at Emory had put me on. So that allowed me to get factor and regular HTC visits. It was also grueling because there would be times where I'm pulling all-nighters to finish projects, but I've just had 13 vials of blood drawn. And my car was broke down and I was living in Atlanta, but taking the bus everywhere. So it was definitely very challenging, and hemophilia is always a part of the challenges. But again, I think using your story in the way like I was able to put hemophilia into fashion and things like that. It also helped me launch my career. So I'm grateful for those. I think every adversity really gives you a new lens, and it just allows you to see life differently. So hemophilia has just informed one of those lenses. So when it comes to medical care and health insurance and just things like that and how it blends into life, I've lived those experiences. So that's always in the back of my mind as I'm moving forward and doing other things and collecting other lenses and adversities in life, and putting them all together to create a clear picture of what I'm doing, where I want to go, and who I am.
That's amazing. And were there people specifically that helped pick you up when you were going through those challenges and having a little bit of doubt?
First and foremost, hats off to moms. And like so many hemo moms, I think there's a line in the Bam Perry song where they talk about their mother as a blind believer in all I dared to be. And I think even times where she thought I was crazy, she let me be crazy and stupid and go and do the things, and always supported me. So when I was struggling, even though my mom knows nothing about my industry or things like that, always been very supportive. And then along the way too, just having cheerleaders and friends in the community. I think our lives are so complicated because of having bleeding disorders on top of the complexity of life in general. It's not easy for anyone. Having friends that like I grew up going to camp with, that when I call those friends or when we're having discussions, I never have to explain to them what I'm thinking when I'm going to a new job. It's okay, new job, new insurance. How is that going to work? You're moving cities, new HTC. There are all these other things that come along with it, that having that support system, it gives you people to talk to where you're constantly not having to explain those things. Like I love our allies who don't have hemophilia and things, but there is always this element of like just trying to explain to people outside of hemophilia what it's like to occupy these spaces. They're like, so your specialty pharmacy rep was also at your high school graduation and is one of your family friends? Yeah. Like, it just, our world does not make sense to anyone but us. Seeing those friends is so great.
My hematologist, my nurse, my physical therapist, my lab tech when I was a kid, they all came to my high school graduation, my wedding. It's weird, but they're family, right?
Yeah, and it is. And it's how we build out our network, because like it's weird to have such a close relationship with some of your medical providers and things, but it's just a reality of our lives.
One final question for you, and I appreciate you sharing so much, and I wish we could talk for hours. But what advice would you give other people with bleeding disorders that have ambitious dreams that might not be the typical path? What would you say to them?
I think even to people who don't have hemophilia, one of the best services that you can do for yourself is taking the time and doing the work to actually fall in love with yourself. So many of the things that you will need to get through in life are just a bit easier when you love yourself enough to get through the difficult moments. And I think especially having hemophilia, sometimes it's hard because we do have so many complexities to our lives. But once you get to that point where you can love on yourself a bit, when you need it especially, it helps those cycles of holding yourself accountable and forgiving yourself move a bit more smoothly, because we will continue to have challenges, we will mess up, we will screw up. And we do need to hold ourselves accountable for a lot of our own actions, but we also need to be able to forgive ourselves and move forward. And having a creative career or being in a space that's highly competitive, it's like you need that even more, because you get used to so much rejection and have so many difficulties that will come your way just because you've chosen a sort of different path. But when you can go home in the evening and say, okay, we didn't maybe get where we wanted to today, but here's what we did accomplish, and we're doing okay, and you will be okay tomorrow. Let's get up and do better. And it's a difficult thing at times for different people, but spending some time, even if it's spending time in the mirror and just loving yourself and appreciating yourself, all of those things can really set you up to do a little bit better. I think of so many moments in life where it's, if I hadn't already at least done some of that work, I would have been in really bad shape.
Yeah, that connected with me in a lot of really interesting ways when you were saying that, accepting yourself. And really, I think that was a pivotal time for me too, is like, I struggled a lot accepting the fact that I had a bleeding disorder and feeling different, and then meeting people that also had it made me feel like I belonged and realized I should be proud of who I am, not wishing I didn't have something, and realizing the strength that it brought me and the amazing things that it brought me. And it wasn't really until that self-acceptance came into the picture. It wasn't until then that I felt like I could set my sights high and have ambitious goals and see where I could take things. That's what makes this all unique and interesting and cool, and I love it.
My friends Michelle and Terry would say, everybody has their something, right? I mean, you don't always know what it is. Sometimes they don't know what it is. And every time you get in that space of thinking, why me, you also have to pair that with a why not me? Because getting really stuck and marred down in that why me is a form of entitled behavior. And it's like that's again holding yourself accountable. Check that entitlement and say, why not me? I can do this.
Thank you, Christian, so much for sharing your story and being such an amazing inspiration to our community and just an inspiration, period. Can you share where people can follow your work? Maybe see a little bit about that Romanoff piece, your Romanoff line, because that's so cool. I'd love as many people to see it as possible.
ChristianHarris.com was not available for a reasonable price when I got my domain, so you can go to ChristianLHarris.com. And there will be links to my Instagram, also Christian L. Harris, and my LinkedIn, Christian L. Harris. But my Christian L. Harris Instagram page is mostly just portfolio work, and I haven't been doing a lot of it lately, so I don't post there a lot. But I have another Instagram account, The Roaming Hemo, where I talk about travel and things like that. So going back to that 7-year-old kid watching the Travel Channel, all of my more current adventures, past and present really, are The Roaming Hemo on Instagram.
For me, reaching the summit was always a very literal thing. I had 7 peaks, and I had to get to the top. When we set out to make this season of the Final Summit, I was so excited to hear personal stories from people across the globe that I knew would give me the inspiration for my next great adventure. Some people I've known for a while, others I'm meeting for the first time. But even if they were stories I'd heard before, I knew they had to be shared with the rest of the world. Thank you for tuning in to the Final Summit Season 3. It's such a pleasure to get to make this podcast, and listeners from far and wide have given us the ability to keep going. Thank you again. I'm Chris Bombardier. Until you hear from me again, keep climbing your own mountain.
The Final Summit is produced by BloodStream Media. Learn more at bloodstreammedia.com. This episode is hosted by Chris Bombardier, written by Dru Johnston, edited by Greg Bernard, produced by Keith Corneluck, executive produced by Patrick James Lynch. The Final Summit was also made possible by support from Genentech. Visit genentechhemophilia.com to take a look at how they are supporting the hemophilia community.